Hey guys, I hope that everyone had a fantastic weekend. I know you guys have worked really hard this weekend, and I thank you for that. I appreciate it, and I'm really proud that you guys have all made it this far, and you're still working. Um, you haven't, hopefully, no one's thrown their computer, smashed anything, killed a sibling. Um, but it's the final week of class, and so let's kind of um, trying to recap what we've talked about this semester, talk about a few final points that I really want you guys to take home. And if I talk kind of funny, I've got like sores all in my mouth, and for 2 days I've been yawning. See, all I had to do was say yawn, and I start to yawn. I don't know what's going on. My daughter and I, neither of us have been sleeping very well. And yes, another pair of glasses. I went to put my glasses on either yesterday or day before, and I picked them up. There's only one earpiece. I have no clue where the other earpiece went. And they were all like, I can't do that. So now I've got two pair with one earpiece, different earpiece. And I still haven't found my regular see everything glasses anyway. These I can just basically see from here to like maybe 4 feet out. Anyway, so so let's talk about some things that that will kind of recap the semester, as well as really drive home some points I want you guys to make sure that you continue to demonstrate in your writing, and not just writing for this class. We talked at the beginning of the semester that the argument is one of those forms, one of those genres, types of writing, really, that can be used across all disciplines, and generally is. And we even talked about that in Plato's works, that he agrees that rhetoric is something that's kind of since rhetoric involves really mastering language or words, using words as your main tool, and words are something that you've got to use across disciplines, then rhetoric is the type of argumentation that you will use across disciplines, or the type of writing, rather. And certainly, whatever it is that you're writing about, you're almost always going to be arguing a point or trying to prove something, presenting your point of view, even if you're just kind of, reiterating what other people have said. You may be, if you're taking a psychology class and you're doing a paper on something, you may be talking about a particular theory. Well, you mention the theory, and then you say, well, this person talks about it, and this person says about it, and this is an example, and these are reasons, and here's some statistics and stuff. So it's the same basic format. How do I know that? Because I've already been through college. I've already done all this that you guys are doing now. And I've been through, many years of college, and different different universities as well. And so they all kind of, want you to be able to master that argumentative type of writing. And there's certain things that you need to make sure that you have. But one thing, of all the people that we've read, all the philosophers, orators, rhetoricians, sophists, whatever, one thing that they pretty well all agree on is that you want to come across as being unbiased. Whether that's, making sure you're not using fallacy, whether that's extending the hand of goodwill, whether that is, using the language that, that speaks to, to everyone, accepting that there are other points of view, entertaining other points of view. It shows your audience that you are willing to consider opinions other than your own. However, just, showing your audience that you're willing to consider those by mentioning that opposing view, that's not the only way that you can come across or avoid coming across as being biased. Probably the next biggest way that people kind of get trapped oftentimes in sounding biased is the use of language. And it almost always happens when you are passionate about a particular topic that you're writing about. And what happens is you kind of let your passion manifest itself in language that's a little too strong for argumentative writing. Now, keep in mind, if you're just writing strictly persuasive, even if it's fact-based, if you're just writing strictly persuasive, get that emotion-driven idea out there, then that's different. Oftentimes you do use like ad hominem, that degrading language, or you might use language that is just way over the top. But when you're writing argumentatively, you have to kind of reel that in. And so you need to kind of find that happy medium. Use words that are purposeful, that are meaningful, that are still powerful without being overpowering to your audience, especially those that maybe tend not to agree with what you have to say right off the bat. You need to kind of ease them into it, let them dip their toes in the water before they, just dive right in. And so you need to use language that brings them into your paper, not that pushes them out, not that makes them really question, are your motives to persuade, or are you just basically telling me what you think it is? And you don't want that for your audience. But if you look at each, these men that we went over as individuals, even though they have slightly different points of view as to how to present that argumentative paper, they do all have at least a system, and a system, that works. Maybe for some it works for maybe just a small number or small type of paper, or a small number of people. I would say that Rogers is probably the most limiting of the ways. I think his is how can I say this? Maybe the hardest to implement more universally. I think that you have to have a more specific audience in mind. I think that it's not just for any audience, and I think it's maybe not just for any topic. But still, the way that he, demonstrates argument can be handled is quite effective. And we talked about how it's actually quite effective in the field of psychology, and maybe with therapists, or maybe parents with children, or teacher with student, or, there's any number of audiences that could be effective for. But just maybe not universally effective. And that's fine. It's still a type of argumentation. It's still something that you should consider, because you might find yourself in a situation where that's the one you need to use. That's going to be the most effective because of who I know my audience is, because of what I know my topic is, because the situation that I'm understanding. Rogers is going to be the most effective. And so you really need to look at these not just as, I learned something for them about argumentation. You need to take them really individually and say, you know what, I know now that when I'm writing a paper about X, 2X, 4X, about X, this may be the route to go, or this is where I need to center my argument. Or, any number of those things that they really stressed. If you're doing that general kind of a basic works for everything type of arguing, Aristotle is the way to go. And that's the reason, that we've said it again and again, that's the reason that we use the Aristotelian method. His is the one that really makes the most sense with, just any particular, you can apply it to any topic, any audience, any situation. And so it's nice that that he really he worked hard to kind of perfect and include everything that would be needed. Okay, we're going to move on then from that sort of thing. Let's move on then to the audience. Now they did. Each of these men had something to say about the audience, whether the audience was the opposition or whether it was just a general audience. You need to be able to connect with them. And since we write using the Aristotelian method, then you need to learn how to use the rhetorical triangle, and then possibly even consider telos and kairos as well, because those can be utilized very well. And for those of you, well, all of you, for this last paper, you chose a more current topic. Now, some of you chose topics that were very current and that dealt almost specifically, that's not the word I want to use, but that said something about the coronavirus. You usually applied it to something a little bigger, which is what you needed to do, since there's really not a whole lot of information out there on just coronavirus or COVID-19. But when you take advantage of a situation, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's other types of events that are going on, you certainly are incorporating or headed towards incorporating kairos, because kairos is taking that temporal and physical setting into consideration and utilizing that to help strengthen your argument. Now, just because it's something that's there doesn't mean it's going to strengthen your argument. Think about Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights movement, and then he was speaking specifically about, equality, and specifically about how far, everyone has come in this country. And he decided to give that speech purposefully, meaningfully, in front of the Lincoln Memorial, in front of President Abraham Lincoln, who basically was the biggest proponent of civil rights and making sure that we moved forward and moved out of that time when there was going to be, when there was that inequality and time of unrest in our country. So that was utilizing kairos. It was 100 years. So he's using, from the time that President Lincoln had given his speech at Gettysburg. So it was using kairos in the temporal way. And then in the physical way, it was taking advantage of it as well. You may not always have the advantage of both temporal and physical setting, but certainly if you did, that'd be great. But think about if he had the Lincoln Memorial with the people in front of it, no, with it being behind the people rather than in front of the people. So for those of us who are watching it via satellite, so on television, it would have felt differently than watching his speech the whole time, because we're seeing the Lincoln Memorial behind him. The Washington Memorial behind him the whole time, and the people that are out there, on the lawn. They would be, once again, they would be seeing the Washington Monument behind him. I guess it's a memorial, monument, because the Lincoln Memorial would have been behind them. And so it wouldn't have had the same impact on them. And that's who he was trying to impact, or those people that were there. It wasn't per se people on, that would be watching it on television, or people in, years to come who would be watching, YouTube videos of it. And so he knew who he needed to be impacting. He needed to be impacting the people right then, the people in Washington that were there on the lawn listening to him. They were congressmen, they were senators, they were, government officials, decision-making people. And then there was a lot of civilians as well. and they were the ones that needed to be impacted at that moment. It wasn't the people that stayed home. It was the people that made the effort to be out there. Yeah, secondarily, the people who were watching it on television, because it at least was going to be aired in part. But yeah, the people he needed to impact were those are the ones that he concentrated on when determining where to be making that speech. And so you need to think about it kind of in a multifaceted way. It's not just it's not just how it's going to look in the moment, but how it may look in the future as well. And thankfully for us, there were good cameramen. And so part of the time we were seeing it through Martin Luther King Jr.'s eyes, and part of the time we were seeing the speech or hearing the speech, seeing things through the eyes of the audience. And most of the time it was through the eyes of the audience, since we are the audience. They wanted to have that camera view. And so I think that was well played on their part. But of course, there are lots of ways that you can take advantage of that. But you want to make sure that you are connecting with your audience. And the easiest way to do that is through the rhetorical triangle. Connecting with them by making sure that you have used credible, authoritative sources. Something that I want you guys to keep in mind is when you're writing, even though you may have vast knowledge about something, it doesn't mean that you're the expert. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're going to come across as the expert when someone else is reading your paper or listening to you. You're a student, you're writing an academic paper. You've got to have people that are more authoritative backing you up. So be really careful when you choose those sources. And when you make particular statements, if it sounds like something that an expert would know and not just a student, I will probably write, and I have in some of your papers, citation. You're not the expert. You may know as much as the expert, but you're not the expert. You're not that, you don't have that credibility yet. It's kind of like not YouTube, but the internet. You can find factual information on the internet, but the internet just hasn't been around long enough for its credibility to really have been established. And so that's one of the reasons we ask you guys not to get those internet-born sources, to get sources that were born on print, as speeches, documentaries, things like that. The other thing is pathos. So connecting with your audience emotionally, and not just to sway them using emotion, but to sway them using things that perhaps evoke emotion, but are based on fact, like eyewitness accounts, personal stories, interviews. And there certainly are other, there's a variety. There's actually, I think, a list in your book. Yeah. Of what would be considered pathos. The last one, of course, of the rhetorical triangle is logos. And this is kind of where it seems like we kind of settle when we think of proving things using fact. But really, they're all fact-based. Aristotle thinks that logos is probably the most effective of the three. And that's because it's a numbers game. And there's something about numbers, whether it's dates, measurements, things like that, but something about numbers that makes people sit up and listen and say, oh, well, that must be true then. Someone did a study, it must be true. Not just that it happened, I saw it, it must be true. Which would be, which would be pathos. But logos is great to use as well. And having a balance is nice. But, we've talked about sometimes the paper doesn't really call much for pathos. It may be more of a logos-based topic. And so that's fine. You don't have to use all three of them. But if you can, then do it. Because the more of each of those that you use, of course, then the broader the audiences that you're going to be connecting with, because we're all different. Some of us are numbers people, yeah, I'm a professor. You got to speak to me in numbers. Some of us are emotionally driven. Some of us are more that authority, looking at who said it. And so, you're going to be connecting with more people the more that you use this. One last thing I want to talk about, and then you guys can move on for the week. I want you guys to really, really crack down, and we're kind of doing a lot of concentrating on MLA formatting this week. This is something that, unfortunately, this is not an MLA class. I'm not here to teach you MLA formatting. We have resources to teach you MLA formatting. We've got a book, we've got a pocket style manual, you've got online resources, and you've got the Writing Center. And so those are what you or should have been using. And that in the little instruction that I've given you as well, like my feedback or just the stuff that we talked about in class. You really need to discipline yourselves and crack down on that MLA formatting. That's going to be a big deal, and something that, these papers that you're using as your finals, even if you're taking the final, you still are doing the last paper. These papers get submitted to a board of instructors from the Writing Center, the English department, the Humanities department, maybe other departments as well, I'm not quite sure. And they look at these papers. Well, let me tell you, they're going to look and say, this student didn't learn a thing about how to format an academic paper. They just wrote trash, but that's kind of where it should go, because an academic paper has to be formatted in a particular way, so it falls in the category of academic paper. Otherwise, it's something that you wrote off the top of your head and it goes into this other stack. So really discipline yourselves with that MLA formatting, and ask me, ask the Writing Center, ask the library. You need to pull in your resources, utilize those. And of course, if you haven't been to an MLA workshop, and I know a bunch of you haven't because I have not been getting notifications, then you need to make sure see if you can get into a last minute workshop. I don't know if you can. But, okay, I'm done for now. I've talked a lot. I think this is the longest one I've had this semester. I will see you guys in our group discussion on Wednesday. Until then, bye.